There's an inherent flaw within the human psyche of wherein which once a false belief has been successfully embedded into the human mind, the person will then only notice those incidents that appears to confirm the false embedded belief and will become psychologically blinded from seeing the greater amount of evidence refuting it. Then, based upon this psychological blindness, the person will then insist that he's confirmed the false embedded belief, although he has in fact not. This inherent flaw within the human psyche is what's called the illusionary truth effect. It's when people have been made to believe that false information is true because of being constantly subjected to the false information. And they then begin functioning based upon the false information rather than the true reality of the contrary. Here's an example that explains how this works. If the false belief that all Asians are bad drivers has been successfully embedded into a person's mind, the person will then only notice those Asian drivers that appears to confirm the false embedded belief and become psychologically blinded from seeing the greater amount of excellent Asian drivers that refutes it. Then, based upon this psychological blindness, the person will then argue vehemently that he's witnessed it for himself that most Asian drivers are bad. All those absolutely untrue. Likewise, white social engineering scientists exploited the same inherent flaw within the human psyche to trap millions of black people within a perpetual state of black self-contempt. White propagandists fed lots of false propaganda into the black communities that have manipulated millions of black people to believe that it's ourselves that are now our worst enemies. Moreover, that we're like crabs in a bucket that never supports each other, but instead only wants to pull each other down. Once these false beliefs have been successfully embedded into the collective minds of black people, many then only notices those incidents that appears to confirm the false embedded beliefs and become psychologically blinded from seeing the greater amount of evidences refuting them. Case, point, and proof. Those black people that have been brainwashed to believe that our racial group are like crabs in a bucket that never supports each other are psychologically blinded from acknowledging the fact that during the 2008 election of President Obama, he received more black votes than any other previous president in U.S. history. Millions of black people that had never before voted in any previous elections registered and voted in 2008 for Obama. In some states, black people stood in voting lines for up to 5 hours. During Obama's inauguration, millions of black people showed up in Washington, D.C. in record-breaking numbers at their own expense, filling up those expensive hotels, and stood outside in record-breaking cold temperatures to witness Obama being sworn in as the first African-American president. There's also the 1995 Million Man March, wherein which over 1 million black men showed up in Washington, D.C., also at their own expense, in support of and at the request of Minister Louis Farrakhan to do so. Thousands of black people also showed up to support Trayvon Martin in Sanford, Florida, and donated money to his family. In the aftermath of the George Floyd's death, millions of black people globally in the US, the UK, the Caribbean, and in Mother Africa took to the streets declaring that Black Lives Matters. George Floyd's death was the catalyst that ignited that global protest, but the rage that fueled it was caused by the deaths of all black people due to the evils of white racism. Now, if black people never support each other, doesn't love each other, then how then did these events happen? These facts and countless more totally destroys the myth that black people are like crabs in a bucket, only pull each other down, never support each other, doesn't love each other. However, many black people are psychologically blinded from seeing these facts by the illusionary truth effect. Those black people that insist that they've confirmed their beliefs that we're like crabs in a bucket based upon their own individual experiences are delusional, because it's not humanly possible to assess the collective state of millions of people based upon anyone's individual experiences. It's just not humanly possible. Those negative beliefs about our racial group were actually deliberately embedded into our collective minds by white oppressive forces. The white society exclusively controls all black societal narratives, statistics, study results, and they even control our mainstream media images. They therefore literally owns our perception of ourselves and our interpretation of our reality. They maintain their social dominance over us by keeping us believing the fraudulent and worst possible narratives about ourselves. The hidden reality is that black people were the most unified group in the U.S. This is why the unprecedented unified protest demonstrated by African Americans during the 1960s still remains unrivaled by any other group in U.S. history. It's also why former FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover said that the unification of the American Negro was the greatest threat against the nation. They therefore divided us by manipulating us to perceive ourselves as being the most divided. To divide a unified people, you do so by manipulating them to believe that they're the most divided. They'll then begin functioning based upon the false divisive narrative, in a sense, making it true. This is what's called a self-fulfilling prophecy. A self-fulfilling prophecy is a process through which an originally false narrative leads to its own confirmation. In a self-fulfilling prophecy, people start acting based upon the false narrative about themselves, thus, in a sense, making it true. Therefore, all that's required to divide a unified people is to manipulate them to believe that they are the most divided. This is because people's beliefs influence their actions. Within a self-fulfilling prophecy, people's behavior aligns with what they've been taught to believe about themselves, thus, in a sense, making it true. It doesn't matter if the information presented is untrue. Most people will act accordingly to it because they've all been given the same disinformation about themselves. Stop letting them fool you. A fact that has remained consistent throughout history is that the oppressor's depiction of the oppressed is never a true one. It's always falsely, negatively distorted to serve the hidden agendas of the oppressors. This fact has remained consistent throughout history, and it is still especially true now in regards to black people living under white oppression. The truth is that black people do love and support each other. During slavery, the most effective tool used for controlling the enslaved Africans was not the whip. It was actually by threatening our enslaved ancestors that their offsprings and mates would either be sold off or killed if they became rebellious. Black people's love for each other was the most effective tool used for controlling our ancestors during slavery. In fact, whenever a rebellious slave fell in love and or became a parent, the white enslaved was related because it provided them with leverage for controlling the stubborn enslaved African. Keeping us believing that we don't love and support each other is how they now control us, sadly to our detriment. The oppressed will always believe the fraudulent worst about themselves. That's a quote by Frantz Fanon. Those of us who tell you the truth are trying to free you from a mental prison that you don't even know you're trapped within. Those black people who do not critically think never notices their mental chains. Black people, it's time to wake up to our reality. One love and peace.